This is the Coaching Leader Podcast, a resource for modern, busy people leaders like you who know that just directing people simply does not work in the long run. We provide focused skill practice and the relevant thinking models, so you will ask better questions and make your team shine. Freshly served to you by IntelliCoach.org from hot and spicy Singapore.
Hello and a very, very warm welcome to the very first episode of the Coaching Leader Podcast. It's quite amazing that I finally get this baby off the ground. I can tell you it has been a long time in the making, and starting a podcast sounds easy on paper, but it's so difficult to pull off all these mental blocks. And it's really all in your head. What prevents you from getting it done? I've had this equipment for podcasts 2 years ago. Can you believe it? And I've been probably taking 10 tries before I felt like I'm ready to publish this first podcast. Because I simply felt uncomfortable. And this is something that I think many of us experience when we try to do new things in our life, isn't it? So we do something new and we feel right away incompetent. And getting us to a point of comfort is not so easy. Finally getting to this point here and having you hear this is really a big accomplishment for me. So this very first episode, I really want to answer just one question for us. Why run this podcast, Maik? So I have spent the last 2 years almost exclusively helping senior leaders become better coaches to their team members. And you might scratch your head and say, what, the coaching skills? What's the big point about that? Why is that difficult? I want to use these few minutes to talk about that, because there are two very important things I learned. Maybe three, actually. 3 things I learned in the last few years about coaching and helping leaders embrace these skills. I think the first thing is that I learned a lot about coaching while I helped others coach. It's quite an amazing journey for me. So I thought I was coaching sort of on an okay level. I rate myself frequently and I'm quite self-critical about that and my impact. But I thought I had quite a lot of the skills, the basic skills at least, mastered to a degree that I can help people. But helping people learn and activate these skills themselves was a very different ballgame. And it really comes back to what I heard as the active learning credo. I think you learn the most when you start teaching it to other people. And it has come so true for me. So the second thing is that I realized only while I taught leaders specifically how to use coaching skills, that I found out how powerful this skill really is. But we have to stop here for a moment, because you and I are probably thinking of quite different things when we talk of coaching, don't we? I mean, coaching has been a trend word. It's something that's sort of expected from every leader around the world. But what's behind that word? What is behind it? Coaching can mean almost anything to anybody. Does it mean I advise, I help people what to do, I train them, I sit next to them during a meeting and I tell them exactly what to do? Do I solve for them? What does coaching mean? Certainly it means something about helping somebody, doesn't it? And when we Google the word coaching, it usually comes up with a picture of somebody at the top of a mountain pulling someone up who's just one step below. So how do we agree? Put it this way. How do we agree on what coaching means? Now, maybe I should invite an authority here of some sort. Let me just ask her here. Siri, what do you think is coaching?
It's your opinion that counts, Maik.
Yeah, giving me a bit of attitude. Okay. How do I ask you? Siri, what is coaching?
Coaching is a form of development in which a person called a coach supports a learner or client in achieving a specific personal or professional goal by providing training and guidance. The learner is sometimes called a coachee.
Thank you, Siri. So, a coach supports a learner in achieving a specific goal. And how do they do that? By providing training and guidance. The learner is sometimes called a coachee, which I find a super awful word. I don't know of a better word. Sometimes the recipient of coaching is called maybe a performer, a client. Yeah, but for the lack of a better word, unless somebody else has one, I'll still call it a coachee. So yeah, the core of what Siri just told me is coaching is training and advising, isn't it? And here I've got to say, Siri is using a coaching definition quite close to what sports coaching does. So we have a coach who is senior in experience, and certainly somebody who also has a mentorship role. And he helps people perform. He helps their coachees perform better. He tells them what to do, and he helps them gain ownership. But the coaching that a typical executive coach does is surprisingly different. And it's also the coaching that I've been helping teach leaders over the past few years. Because what that coaching means is, it's really stopping yourself from being the one who solves and who gives advice. So it's almost quite the opposite, isn't it? So when I coach as a leader and I put myself in that mode, now this is a coaching conversation right now, what I deliberately do is I stop giving a solution or an advice to my coachee, to my direct report, to my team member. But what do you do instead? What do you do instead then? If my team member comes to me and asks me, I have trouble with this client, help me. What do you do? If you don't say to them, look, I know exactly what you should do. I've been there before, man. Let me show you what I would do. So if I tell you right now, I'm teaching leaders not to do that. So what do they do instead when they coach? That's very simple. They figure out by asking good questions how the other person can find their own solution. So let that sink in for a moment. So coaching means, in that sense, helping someone else find their own path, find their own solution. And you might wonder why is that useful? Why might that be something that we actively need to teach? Yeah, there are two reasons, as I said. Two reasons. The first thing is it's immensely powerful. And the reason is because when we let someone else figure something out, or when we ourselves figure something out, it's exciting, isn't it? A problem comes up, a challenge is there, a spark in our head suddenly helps us realize this is what I can do. It's almost its own motivation. We run the moment we build on an idea that comes to from our own brain. It's that simple. But if an idea comes from somebody else, we might still think, yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. Let me do that. It is not as effective. And the easiest example I can give is, and I've failed at that miserably many times as a coach myself, when I as a coach with a client, and when we sit together and my client asks me a question on how they might approach that conversation next week with their manager, and I think to myself, oh, Mike, you have a lot of scenarios. What do I do right in this moment? Should I just ask him coaching questions and let him figure something out? Or should I just give him my best advice? And I know it's good advice. It's good advice. It has worked for me in the past. Why shouldn't it work for him? Would it not be irresponsible in this moment to hold back my very good idea? But I realized when I do that when I give in to that solution tendency, and it feels good, I tell you that, it feels so good to give advice, especially when other people ask you for it. It's a perfect invitation, isn't it? It feels so good. We become the hero. People thank us for it. They say, great idea. I like this. Let me do that. But what I realized as a coach is a big difference. if I tell them what they should do and I meet them again after a few weeks and they'll come back to me and ask them, so how did it go? And I get this blank stare from their face and they tell me, actually, I didn't have time. Sorry, it didn't work out. Or some other excuse. But when in that moment, when I'm in a coaching moment and I feel that solution that wants to come out of me and I stop it from doing that, I push it aside. I push it at the back of my head. And instead I'm asking, what would you do? How might it look like if you had that good conversation with your boss? How would you recognize it's a good conversation? What could be a small signal? How might you prepare for that? If I ask these kind of questions, they feel in that moment less fulfilling because it's that solution. It's at the back of my head. It wants to come out. It's right there, right next to me. It's like knocking on the door. It wants to be let in. But what happens if I don't let that solution come out and if I let the other person think it through? Very often magic happens. And it's magic that suddenly the person sits back, the eyes go up, they say, let me think. That's a good question. And in that moment, they don't need a solution. They are developing something on their own. It's quite fascinating. So, and what often happens is they know what to do next. People very often know what to do. And it just needs somebody to help them sort of organize the messiness in their head. And very frankly, this is a very untapped potential for many leaders out there. And that's probably the most important finding, the third finding that I had in the last 2 years. That whenever I get people join workshops around the globe where we help people activate coaching skills, people come in and with the idea, yes, I coach already. This can only be about fine-tuning what I'm absolutely already doing. And in almost, let's say 95%, the remaining 5% are leaders who had real coaching training. 95% of the cases, people come to me afterwards and they say, look, I had no idea that in my 20 years of leading people, I have never actually coached. And that's really an immense truth. So the potential of coaching is one where people gain ownership of their work, where they run for themselves, where they don't go back to us as leaders all the time asking more and more questions on what we should do. They will be more accountable. Yet most leaders who technically know that, in the situation when they're being asked, they resort to solving, to advising, to making it easy for the other person and making themselves feel like a hero. Because it's so tempting, so easy. So it is this recognition, that paradox really, of knowing what to do, but actually not doing it, that brought me to run this podcast. Because I truly believe, and I've seen it so many times, that there are very easy ways for us to make use of the vast potential that real coaching can have for us as leaders. Predominantly, it can save us buckloads of time. And it can finally help us get some focus on the work that only we can do. I don't know about you, but I've been, as a leader, mostly firefighting. And most leaders that I've been talking firefight non-stop. Their teams come to them with all sorts of problems and challenges, and the first thing they often do is tell them what to do. Or tell them their own idea, their solution. And by that virtue, they reduce the potential ownership, the potential speed with which someone else can move ahead with their own solution. So I want to use this podcast really and the subsequent episodes to share a lot of the small and big learnings that I've made over the past 2 years. And frankly enough, I don't know of another medium to do this. So I want to enhance these podcasts with some webinars, some visuals too, some documents that you can use. But essentially, I want to help most of the leaders out there find a way to bring more coaching into their world, more coaching into their day-to-day interactions with their people. Because frankly, most of us don't do it enough. We think we coach, but we don't. We advise. So there's some very interesting content coming up, and we'll start the next episode right away with a concept that underpins all coaching. And without it, no coaching would work. And it's not a powerful question. It's not a coaching model. It's something much simpler. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoyed this very first episode.
You have been listening to the Coaching Leader Podcast, your resource to activate strengths and coaching skills in leaders. Head over to IntelliCoach.org to check out our blog and offers. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a 5-star review on iTunes. Thank you for tuning in.
Well, thank you for sticking around a little bit longer here. And no, this is not a mistake. It's actually by design. So what I plan to do is to add a few more additional minutes to every podcast to include a few more personal notes, maybe some opinion. Maybe these are things that are not as transferable to you, but that I thought are quite important to me. And whatever I say here is my best judgment. So it's especially this experience that I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast about creating that podcast. And it was such a journey, and I wanted to spend a few more minutes on that struggle. So I mentioned I've bought the podcast equipment almost 2 years ago. And yeah, it feels like an accomplishment when you get the technical equipment done. It feels like an accomplishment, but have you done anything? No. How do you go about creating this? You want to have a story to tell. You want to have an overarching idea. You want it to sound perfect. You want to come across as confident. You want to not just blabber on. You want to sound energetic. Yeah, so what did I do? I created quite a big story arc, a huge mind map of ideas what I could do. But because it was so convoluted, so big, I never got started. And a few months ago, I really remembered again the importance of the idea of quantity very often leading to quality. And it's true. So there is this old story of a pottery competition. I think it's from a book, where the teacher gives 2 groups different tasks. One group is supposed to create as many pottery designs as possible, and the teacher will just select the best within that same time frame. The other group is told to create just one perfect pottery design. And what I found is once these 2 groups were compared is that it's not the group which focused on the one best pottery design that won, but it's the group that created more quantity. So they created more material, more things to play with. They had more learning cycles, I would say. And in that same manner, it clicked with me once I heard that. And I said, I will never be able to start out in a way that it fully satisfies my own standards. Why would I even try? So this podcast is also a reflection of a new learning curve for me. And it's really the first time that I expose my own learning curve in the public. And it's an exciting and a bit scary part to do that. But I feel very excited about the content. That helps me. What I noticed is, in the beginning, that perfectionism led me, for example, to create long podcast episodes. I created maybe 5 or 6. They were all too long. And frankly, too academic. So I wanted to get away from that, from 1-hour conversations that also sound more like this, where I speak, and then I think for a while, then I speak again, and I share some ideas, but it doesn't sound energetic. Do you feel the difference? And this is something which I've learned, had to relearn. I think 6 or 9 months ago, quite a while ago, I took a speech training. And specifically for the reason of controlling my voice more during workshops. But I also asked this speech trainer what the impact could be in podcasting. And she tells me there are different type of voices I should use for podcasting, for training. And the podcasting voice should be a bit higher. And that is what I'm actually doing right now. And surprisingly, raising my voice like this alone helps me amp my energy level. And that's something fascinating, which I never expected and never planned for. And my whole scripting that I've done in the beginning, I also throw overboard. What I ended up doing now, what I'm doing right now is, I sort of do a self-interview style. And you probably will see me do this over the next few episodes. I pose a few main questions to answer during the episode, and then I just let myself talk and have trust in my ability to hold the conversation. Many trainers have probably experienced that. I don't know how many trainers are out there who train and then venture into podcasting. Well, it definitely happens to me. That it's so easy, comparatively easy, put it this way, to hold a conversation when you have faces in front of you. You see their reactions. You see when they lean back. You see when they frown. You can adjust your body language, your tone, your interaction. You can walk towards them. You can facilitate masterfully. But by God, when you podcast, there's no feedback. There's simply no feedback. And that's a very interesting, strange thing to experience and to simply learn. I think it can be simply learned. And it's the same thing that can be learned by leader coaches. They go through a learning curve and they end up at the end of the workshop at a point where they are more knowledgeable, but they feel a bit incompetent. And it is hard at that point to proceed further. Because we don't want to be incompetent. We want to go back to where we are good. We want to know. We want to be in the know. We want to do what we know best. We want to be sometimes just the hero at work and relying on our strengths. But learning doesn't happen this way. Part of good learning, meaningful learning, is that we go through that valley of slight incompetence. But once we've mastered that, we'll be much better off. So you will walk with me through this. And my goal is really to help all of you find the 80-20 that really make a huge difference in bringing coaching alive at work. So thanks for listening to this. And I hope you have appetite for a few more episodes of the Coaching Leader Podcast. Thank you so much.